let me introduce to you my two sons. These are Daniel and Kristian. Daniel wearing the baseball hat, Kristian without. Both boys affected by quite serious psychiatric conditions. Daniel has schizophrenia and OCD. Kristian has autism, Tourette's syndrome, and ADHD. But this is the story of their lives from where they were in this photograph, classed by the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, as disabled. And in Daniel's case, it actually says in his assessment that there is no expectation that he will ever work. That's written in black and white. And how they sort of transformed from being two sort of disabled young men to two successful brothers. So I'm going to divide this talk into a few sections, and one section is what I call the autistic years, from the moment of Kristian's diagnosis to when he started to sort of function as a normal adult. This 10 years here, when Kristian was about 3 3/4, he was diagnosed with autism, and he was from birth, we knew something wasn't right. He screamed non-stop, and just wouldn't be quiet, and eventually became an intractable teenager. Here he is, looking as if butter would not melt in his mouth. And those of you who've met him in the cafe, you'll be familiar with those eyes, which pierce your soul. Now, the symptoms of autism, you know, some people sort of have this stereotype of Rain Man or whatever, but I'd like to sort of go through the symptoms as they presented in Kristian, because I think each person is unique, each person has their own personality, but within that personality there are inevitably the traits of autism. In Kristian's case, the first issue was insomnia, and whilst my friends in Manchester where we lived at the time, while their children were going to bed at 7, mine were, well, in Kristian's case, he was jumping from sofa to armchair to windowsill until 11 at night, every night. He was screaming constantly, and he still is, prone to anger and violent outbursts. He would literally attack complete strangers in supermarkets. And if you were one of those mothers who had the misfortune to discipline your son in public, Kristian would exercise his version of judgment on you, usually in the form of a very, very hard pinch. He would also engage in risky behaviours, such as jumping out of upstairs windows, running in front of traffic, throwing branches at BMWs. I don't know why that was. Fortunately, he moved on to Wombles, but that was one of them. And here he is, water pistoling my sister. That's my arm, many years ago, but for most of the autistic years, I was bruised, severely attacked by Kristian on many occasions, and we actually had to lock ourselves, my husband and I and Daniel, we had to lock ourselves in a room in the house to prevent Kristian from attacking Daniel, because even though he wasn't classed as being at risk, we knew he was at risk from Kristian's attacking. This article here from was printed in the Manchester Evening News. I wrote this back in 2006, sort of in recognition of a lady who was my age, more or less, at the time, and her son, who was also about Kristian's age at the time. This lady, Angela, who lived quite near me, I didn't know her, I never met her. The first I saw was on the news when she got a train from Stockport and went up to Hull, and her and her son jumped off the Humber Bridge. And that story of her loss and her the tragedy of that family has lived with me to this moment, and I try to make my own life a voice for Angela, because I think, well, you know, there but for the grace of God, that would have been me. So, you know, I salute you, Angela. Okay, moving on. So just as Kristian was beginning to resemble, you know, a functioning child, still in a special needs school, still, you know, challenging behaviour, but, you know, beginning to calm down, just at that moment, when Daniel was coming up to 16, or just 16 thereabouts, he developed schizophrenia. He went from being a carefree schoolboy to a completely tormented adult. And here he is as the carefree schoolboy. I should say that those of you who are interested in sort of community and sociology and so forth, Daniel has had all the benefits that any child could expect to have. He has 2 loving parents, a father who absolutely dotes on him, a father who is hands-on, always there, you know, at his side. He's had wonderful holidays, and every benefit that could have come his way have come his way. And so, you know, that might influence how you think about mental illness. So some of the symptoms that Daniel presents with are as follows. The typical one, of course, hearing voices. We all know that. And in Daniel's no exception. He will hear things and he'll often hit his head because of the voice, which is obviously negative, telling him something awful about himself. He has persistent, unusual beliefs. So, for example, he might think that something is dirty when it isn't. So in the cafe, if you've ever been to our cafe, you will have seen Daniel examining cups from strange angles. This is because he's checking for germs or contamination. And however hard you tell him, or however many times you say, no, it's okay, it's clean, it's washed, you cannot dissuade Daniel from that position. There was a decline in self-care and motivation, and just want to dwell on that word motivation for a moment, because I know at the moment in the news that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is on a bit of a mission to try and get people back into work, people who, in his words, are sort of perhaps coasting along under sick notes and avoiding work. Well, I think, you know, in Daniel's case, lack of motivation is a very, very, very serious impediment to him working. And I think we should never underestimate the effect of poor motivation and how that impacts on somebody's life. It is and has been one of the most difficult things to deal with in Daniel's care. And then his brain, he went from being able to sort of do GCSEs, which he just about got, to being very disorganized. He can't think straight, he can't put things in an organized way. His room, we have to go up regularly and tell him to tidy his room. And if you've been in the cafe, you will have seen my screeching act of, get the counter tidy, don't put that there, what's that doing there? And those of you who come, you've seen that a few times, because he just cannot organize himself to be sort of neat and tidy there. So what's it like living with disabled sons, you know, with sons with these kind of difficulties? I can't really tell you how tiring it is. The fatigue you experience, if you've just given birth and your child is maybe 2 weeks old, you will know that fatigue. There's no other fatigue like it. It's chronic, it's all the time, it's across time. And that was the biggest thing that John and I faced when our children were, you know, growing up and, you know, going through their various issues. We were always tired. We did not have energy to do anything for ourselves. So even though we lived in Manchester, you know, just 5 minutes away from cinemas and theatres and restaurants, we never went to them. In fact, I learned to cut my own hair when Kristian was about 10, because I'd long since given up trying to get to a hairdresser. So this is my own fair work you see here, and it hasn't cost me a penny. So hypervigilance is the other one, and I still suffer from this to this moment, where, you know, if you've ever taken a child out who is high risk, who is at high risk of escape, high risk of damaging, high risk of throwing, you will become hypervigilant. So you're constantly second guessing, you're looking, you're checking, is everything safe? What's going to happen with that door? And, you know, is there anything behind that exit? And, you know, I've seen a member of the public facilitating Kristian's exit through the fire exit, leading onto a busy road, you know, not even realizing that this was a slightly risky thing to do. So you become hypervigilant, constantly on full alert. It's really, really difficult, even now, for me to find the off switch. Depression, this is something which I think comes with this kind of package. I've been on medication for 22 years for depression, and it comes and goes. But I would say that I'm inclined to depression because especially when things are difficult, that's the road I go down. John and I, we were both teachers when we met, and we carried on being teachers for a while. But gradually, both of us, went down to part-time and down a bit more to part-time until eventually we couldn't carry on with our careers. Mainly, we both had to sort of pack it in when the boys actually finished their full-time education. I'll get to that in a moment. But we had to, which of course is why disability is so often correlated with poverty. Because, who's going to look after your child? Somebody has to stay at home to look after them. So you're immediately one salary down, And of course, we return to a caring role, much as you would do if you have toddlers. You can't leave them unsupervised. You have to check that they're getting up at a sensible time. You have to make sure that they're eating proper food and not, and so forth, and keeping their lives in some kind of order. And it was literally just like being back in, nursery land in toddler groups. Language is a funny thing, and certain words were redefined. So, for example, the words home, future, retirement. Our home, which for maybe many of you here might be your refuge, the place where you put your feet up and, have your dinner on your lap. For us, it was our workplace. So we were going out to work and coming home to work. There was absolutely no respite whatsoever. We had no family within 200 miles, and so home was just work. Our future, again, it didn't have any positive connotations. It was just a dark place, like a bit of a pit, really. We couldn't see a way through it. And then retirement, well, that became a pipe dream. And even now, John and I, as you know, if you live locally, we work in the cafe. And in the last... Since we've been married, which is about 30 years ago, we've only been away together once for 2 days. That's our one. That gives you some sort of insight into what it's like living with people who have disabilities. Now, when both boys left full-time education and arrived at adulthood, strangely, at the very moment when most people out in the world were thinking, oh, phew, we've done our bit. They're off now to university, or they're going to get married, or they're going to get a job. Well, none of those things applied. Absolutely none. And it was at this point, it was sort of like a cold shower moment, where I suddenly thought, hang on, what happens to all the other kids then who have got autism and schizophrenia? Where are they? And I realised that most of them are home, just literally at home. In fact, I know there are 2 people here who are exactly in that position. Their sons are at home. And... it's like this sort of invisible population. Even I, and I like to think I, got my finger on the pulse, even I had no idea that there was this invisible population out there of people with disabilities who just stay at home. And it's a sad fact. I mean, I taught at Heronsbridge, the local special needs school, for a few years. And when I bump into my former pupils, I noticed that all of them have put on a great deal of weight since I taught them because they're at home looking at the TV. Quick bit of data here into some background about people with disability. And I'm using the word neurodiverse because I think that's a more positive word. It's estimated that about 15 to 20% of the population is neurodiverse. In other words, they think differently, they see differently, different perspective. But only 1 in 5 of people who are neurodiverse are in paid work. That's a very, very small figure. And then specifically for autism, around 75% of adults with autism still live at home with their parents, as opposed to 16% of the general disabled population. So that shows you some of the difference. And I think this is the other thing that people don't always appreciate, is that autism in particular, and severe mental illness, is a lifelong condition for the family. There's no kind of end. It goes on, and everything you do, everything you plan, is shaped, is dictated to by autism. So how are we going to fill the next 40 years then with our sons? Well, we'd done the work experience thing. They'd had a little go at 1 or 2 things. Projects which were available, they had done those. The council, people like the Prince's Trust. We tried that sort of thing. We'd gone through a whole raft of personal assistance, and that pool had been drained, because actually it's quite difficult to find people who are suitable and who are resilient and who stay long term, because most personal assistants just do it as a bridge between jobs. And then both boys had done courses. So we pretty much ticked every box. And as I said to you earlier, both boys were brought up in an environment where they lacked for nothing, but we still had this thing about 40 years. What are they going to do with their lives? So these are some of the barriers, anyway. I'll quickly go through these, to employing neurodiverse people. False beliefs, the idea that maybe somebody with schizophrenia is going to be running around the office with a knife. Discrimination, sadly, of course, this still occurs. A lot of employers and companies overestimate the cost of adjustments that they have to make to a workplace, and importantly, the lack of professional guidance. So a lot of people are reluctant to take on people with neurodiverse issues because they think it's going to cost a lot of money. Here are some of the benefits. Well, you'll get an enhanced company image if you employ people with disability, and you'll create brand loyal customers. So I know in my case, in the cafe, people come in, not for my lovely food, but to see the boys. And the boys are the brand. They are the brothers. You'll have an improved safety record. This is well known now in all sectors, things like construction and so forth. And you'll reduce employee turnover. It's well known that people with autism don't want to move. They don't want to change jobs. They want to stay put. And they often come with specialist skills and qualities. So, and most adjustments are free or cheap. And I just want to say here that one of the reasons why my sons couldn't access mainstream employment was because of shift patterns. Because companies expect you to be able to do an 8-hour day. And most people can't. If it was reduced to 4, they'd be fine. So here we have the cafe, just down the road from where we stood now. And this was born 2.5 years ago out of 2 decades of anguish and pain. Here are the boys now, skilled up, both of them fantastic in the kitchen, both fantastic with customers. And here they are dressed as waiters, and as you'll know, they have a fantastic attitude of service to people who come in. So it's a story of resilience and of triumph and success for 2 boys who otherwise might have just been left to languish at home and sit on the sofa for the next 40 years. Thank you.